Hi, everyone. It's Jason Stapleton of Wall Street from Main Street. Thanks again for tuning into our podcast and for helping us get over 2 million views on our YouTube channel and over 10,000 iTunes downloads per month. We have a special offer for our Wall Street for Main Street listeners that has proven to be a good investment based on plenty of 5-star reviews from satisfied customers and independent fashion bloggers. Mo and I recently tried some shoes from a new company which is run by a family of third-generation shoemakers called Grant Stone Shoes. These are classic Goodyear welt shoes using full-grain leathers from world-renowned tanneries. In a world filled with disposable products, it can be difficult to find items which can be used for years and later passed down to the next generation. Grant Stone is a smaller brand going direct to the consumer, which offers unprecedented value. Quality and fit is the cornerstone of their program, and the customer response and reviews confirm this. These are high-quality shoes at a good price for the busy professional who wants to improve their appearance at the office, in the boardroom, or out on the town with your girlfriend or wife. Or, if you're single like me, you know you will look good with these shoes on and maybe impress the ladies with your style and taste. But if the ladies love Obama or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders and hate free markets or capitalism or entrepreneurs, at least I will look and feel good in my comfy Grant Stone shoes. Mo and I have worked out a special offer for our listeners. So when you go to grantstoneshoes.com, enter the code GOLD, that's G-O-L-D, for 10% off any purchase. That's grantstoneshoes.com and enter promo code GOLD.
Hey everyone, Mo is here from Wall Street from Main Street, and today's guest is a new guest. It's Jason Stapleton. He's the host of the Jason Stapleton Show and also the founder of Trade Empowered. Jason, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
All right, Jason, but before we get started on talking about the economy and what's going on here in the U.S. and abroad, I want to talk about your background, because every time I bring on a new guest, I like to just talk about where they came from and how, they ended up where they are today, especially for the listeners that may have never heard of you. So you were part of the United States Marine Corps, and you did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then you also worked at the largest private security firm in the world. I want to ask you, were you always a libertarian, or is that something that happened over time during your years in the military?
No, I was not a libertarian until I went overseas to do contracting work, and I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was looking at the wars firsthand, and I was kind of challenging everything that I believed. I was very much a Republican, I guess neoconservative, believed very strongly in an aggressive national defense. And when I went overseas and I saw what we were doing and the policies that George Bush and a lot of Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, were advocating for, I came to the realization that the results we were trying to achieve, we weren't achieving them. And I thought, well, there has to be a better way than this. And about that time, I was studying currency trading, and I was doing a lot of work on international banking and learning about finance. And I stumbled across in my gold research, I stumbled across some works by Ron Paul, and one of them I read was his manifesto. And it completely opened my eyes. It changed my way of thinking. I didn't so much change my way of thinking, but it was just as though someone had taken everything that I believed but didn't know how to express and had put it down in a book. And it was a very short read. It's very quick. And I just from that point on, I think I really considered myself a libertarian, although it took me a long time to learn all of the principles and to really justify all of my reasoning. But that's how I came to it, was after working overseas and doing security work for a number of years.
Was there a specific time or a moment or event that made you realize that your current political belief, you started questioning it and you started to look into libertarianism some more? Was there a specific event that you was a turning point for you?
It wasn't an event. I was doing a lot of work for the State Department, and so I was looking at, and my job mainly was to provide security to diplomats and people who were part of reconstruction efforts in Iraq and in humanitarian efforts in Afghanistan. And so I would take these guys out where they were supposed to be building roads and drilling wells, and they were turning over millions of dollars in this humanitarian aid with little to no accountability. And even after it was determined that they were failing miserably and that the money was being squandered and wasted, you started to recognize that, hey, this wasn't really about helping anybody, that the State Department was really just trying to justify its own existence by creating these programs and then having guys who came out and managed the programs. And then you started to look at the wars and what that was costing in terms of lives, our own lives as American lives, but also in terms of the humanitarian destruction that it was doing in the Middle East, and how that was creating a whole nother level of problems. And you realize very quickly that government is not looking out for your best interest. It doesn't have your interests at heart. It has its own interests at heart. And the people who are working in government are in pursuit of their own self-interest, like we all are as human beings. And that really opened up my eyes to asking some very simple questions about, okay, if this is not the right way, then what would be the right way? What is the right path? And I think the libertarian ideal of limited government and individualism and peace, which means a principle of non-aggression, meaning we're not out there starting wars and starting fights, but rather defending our own, that is going to create the most amount of wealth and opportunity for the most amount of people. And so it wasn't one thing; it was a totality of things that I saw while I was working overseas that kind of put me on that path.
Yeah, I'm glad I found Ron Paul as well, because the one thing that attracted me about him is his approach to foreign policy. Because growing up, I was pretty much on the island by myself when it comes to foreign policy. 9/11 happened when I was in high school. I live in Northern Virginia, which is like right outside D.C. So when they went into Iraq, I was very much against that for a lot of reasons. I did not think they had anything to do with 9/11. I think it was a bad idea. Then they went to Afghanistan, which I understand why they went there. But if they stay there too long, I think that's a war that they won't win.
Yeah.
And I'm right. And 10 years later, I was right about Iraq too, because they had nothing to do with 9/11. And look at it now; it's a lot worse than what it was when they had Saddam Hussein in power.
Well, not only that, but we've managed to spread our destruction and our carnage into Syria and Libya and a host of other surrounding areas. And if certain people in Washington had their way, we'd extend that war and that fighting to places like Russia and Iran as well. And I don't know how you can continue to look at the results of the actions, because I'm a big results guy. We always get angry at conservatives, Republicans always get mad at liberals because they say, well, look at the results of your policies. The results of your policies, despite your good intentions, the results of your policies have failed miserably, so we should stop doing those. But when you throw that in a Republican's face and you say, look at the results of your war on terror, look at the results that you've had overseas, we're not safer, we don't have less carnage, terrorism has not subsided, it's only grown and become worse and more dangerous, then you have to say, look, the results of your policies have not created, despite your good intentions, what you want. So you've got to rethink. You've got to try some different things. And right now, unfortunately, the only thing you're hearing out of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is the same thing. Both of them want to go get ISIS. I don't know what that means, but it probably means more war, more money, more lives, and more carnage. And I cannot see how repeating the same cycle over and over and over again is going to somehow generate you a different result.
Are you surprised at what's happening in the Middle East right now? Because you spend a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and looking at it right now, it's a hotbed for terrorism and extremism, radical Islam. So are you surprised at what happened today?
Oh no, not in the least. Anybody who'd spent any time there knew exactly what was going to happen when we tried to do our drawdown. We had this surge, and everybody talked about the surge under Bush and how well it worked. Well, it worked because we saturated the area and we controlled it, and we managed to push Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Taliban in Afghanistan. We pushed them back, and we managed to. What we did was we pushed them into other areas like Syria. And once we pulled out, the Iraqi army, the Afghan army is a joke, and everybody knew they were a joke. And we knew as soon as we left, a vacuum would be created, and some really bad dudes would come back out of the shadows, and they would wreak carnage again. We knew the government of Iraq was weak. We knew the government of Afghanistan was weak. All of these people are figureheads that the United States propped up, and any lay person on the ground saw what was going on. And so it is no surprise at all. This is stuff we were talking about back in 2005, 2006, and it's just now because Obama has tried to do a drawdown, and we've tried to pull people out of Afghanistan, that we're seeing a resurgence now of radicals trying to take over and carve out space in the Middle East. That was expected, and anyone who was there could have seen it.
And the outcome is pretty sad, especially for the civilians in Iraq and Libya and Syria, because a lot of them are worse off than what they were 10 years ago.
Oh, it's terrible for the that's the one thing, is that you see all the radicals they're a very small percentage of the population. And so what you have is, now it doesn't mean that they don't have problems above and beyond just Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But the point I'm making is that there's a lot of people there who are just trying to provide for their family and are just trying to live a life that most of us would consider not worth living. And now they're bombarded with massive amounts of terrorism and violence. Their homes have been bombed. They're starving to death. Their children are starving. And you think about their lives before America came in to, quote, liberate them from Saddam, and it's not that hard to envision why they would be angry at us and why they would hate America and the West for what they brought down on the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you drop 10,000 tons of bomb per year on in the Middle East, a lot of people are gonna start hating on you because you create a lot of victims from that, and it's justified. If someone dropped 10,000 tons of bomb in the U.S., whether it's North Korea or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like that either.
No, and that's what I try and explain to people is I try to share with them. Imagine for a moment that it was you living, and there's bad people who live in your country, just like there are bad people who live in America, and all of a sudden some other country just decides that they're going to come over and they're going to bomb your town, and they're going to raid your village, and they're going to destroy your schools and your hospitals, and you've lost children, you've lost parents, you've lost friends. Everybody in the Middle East has lost friends and family, and many of them have lost children. And it takes only one picture of a dead child being held by a father to realize how you would be feeling if that was you. And it's not hard to understand where this hatred comes from and why that hatred is starting to bleed over into this homegrown terrorism that we see. Because a lot of the homegrown terrorism is a direct reflection of people who are looking at what's happening to their friends and family living in Syria, living in Iraq or Afghanistan, and saying, you know what, screw America. They're out there killing my friends and my neighbors and my relatives. I'm sick of this, and I'm going to do something about it. So that is not I hope your audience doesn't misinterpret that as a blame America first opinion, because that's not I'm not a blame America firster. I don't want to give you that impression, but I do think it's important that we look at the consequences and how our actions are perceived elsewhere. And I definitely think that ours have been largely viewed negatively in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I try to tell people the same thing. Some people cash on, some people don't, due to their patriotic attitude that they have, and, hopefully they'll get it. So I want to shift gears here and talk about another skill that you mastered while you were overseas, that becoming a currency trader. And then later you started your own company called Trade Empowered. So what made you get into the currency market?
I was looking at my life and what I was good at, and what I was mostly good at was what I was doing, which was contracting work. It was what I was really professionally trained to do. And I decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life, I was trying to figure out what I would want to do. And I sat down and I just asked a really simple question of myself. I said, if I could do anything in the world, what would I want to do? And I decided that I would want to work in the financial markets, and I didn't know how I would want to work in the markets. I thought maybe I'd be a broker, or maybe I'd go to Wall Street and work for a big Wall Street firm, or maybe I'd start a hedge fund or something. But I knew I wanted to do that. I'd always been interested in the financial markets, and I didn't know much about them. And so I thought, well, if that's what I want to do, then what I ought to do is I ought to learn a little bit about how financial markets work and about how different industries work. And I started out learning about the stock market and penny stocks, and then I learned a little bit about futures, and then finally I kind of settled on currency trading. And that kind of my desire to work in that industry led me to kind of this passion and love for trading. And I fine-tuned that love for trading down to the currency markets because it kind of brought together my love of the financial markets along with my love for politics, because they're very much intertwined. The currency markets, for anybody who's involved with those, understand how much currencies are affected by the decisions that central banks make and the decisions that governments make. And so you're kind of paying attention to all of that. So I kind of got to roll all of my loves of finance and politics and economics into one thing and pursue that. And that's what I did, and I got really good at it. I got good enough at it that I left the contracting business to come home, and I was putting my track record together so that I could go and raise a little bit of money. My goal was just to raise $10 or $20 million and to start working that capital. And while I was trading at home, I was sitting there and I got to feeling, really lonely. Trading is a lonely business. I hate telling people I was lonely, like I'm a chump, but it really was. I was going down to my basement every day. I was trading, 6-8 hours a day, and I didn't have any friends. And I just said, well, maybe I want to do something different. And I had taken a whole bunch of training courses over the last several years prior to this. And one of the guys who I took his training course, I really liked it. I thought he had maybe the best training course for futures traders that was available. And so I called him up and I said, hey, I know you're teaching and you're doing this thing. And I said, I'm not sure if I want to make money with it, but I'm really kind of lonely sitting here by myself, and so I thought maybe I would start a trading room and I would just show people what I was doing, and if people dug it, maybe I could cover some of my overhead by just charging people to be in my room. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And to his credit, his name is Todd Brown. He helped me understand how the education business worked. And we later would become partners, and we created Trade Empowered together. And so that's kind of how I transitioned from being. And there's a whole lot of pain and struggle story in between there. But the Reader's Digest version is I worked for several years while I was downrange overseas on learning how to trade, and I spent a lot of money educating myself on the process, and then I managed to get good enough at it that I thought I could do it professionally, and that ended up leading me into education.
Now, there's a lot of people that are afraid to try out forex trading, due to numerous reasons such as risk, volatility. I mean, the forex market never closed. And also, central banks, they always manipulate the currency, so you never know when it's going to go up or when it's going to go down. So what do you say to those people who want to trade forex but are, just scared to try it?
Well, I think that trading can either be a game of percentages where you take a look at again, not a percentage, but a game of probabilities, and you can look at it like any statistician would, or it can be purely gambling. When you go to the casino, all of the tables, the odds are against you. One of the best odds in the house is blackjack. It's about 13-1 against you. The only game in the house that really is equal across all players is the poker table, because the poker table, everybody gets the same rake. The house takes a percentage of every trade, and the poker table acts a lot like the poker room acts a lot like a trading room, right? The broker is the house. The broker takes a percentage of every transaction. And you got two ways to look at this. The playing field is completely level. You can either get in there and gamble, which means just throw your money out there when you think you've got a good hand, and maybe you get lucky and maybe you don't. Or you start playing percentages, and you learn what the probability is that you're going to win based on every single hand that's dealt. And any professional trader will tell, any professional poker player who's been able to make their living as a poker player will tell you the only way you do it is off percentages, being a statistician. The same thing is true in trading. If you want to be successful at trading, you have to develop a trading strategy that produces a positive expectancy. A positive expectancy for your listeners just means that over time you make more money than you lose. Now, you can test those. There's a million of them out there. There are a million ways to do it, but you've got to find one. And once you've found one, you've got to come into the market every single day and trade your plan without deviating from it. And that is the real trick. That's what separates winning traders from losing traders. Is a winning trader has a plan that he knows will produce him a profit over time, and he trades it consistently. A losing trader comes in and either doesn't have a plan or has a plan but doesn't follow it because he doesn't have the discipline to do the same thing over and over again, even when things are going bad. And so I tell people who are interested in trading, I say, first thing you need to understand is if you don't love this like you need, if you don't need it like you need air, if you don't love it like you love your wife and kids, then go find whatever it is that you really do love and pursue that, because that's going to be what makes you the most money in your life. The trading business is full of emotional roller coasters, and you got to really love trading to do it professionally. But if you do love it, then the goal at Trade Empowered is to help you understand what you need to do to be successful.
And that's a great point. Yeah, trading is very emotional too, because some days you have great days and then you have bad days, and it's no different than investing in a company or a stock, or going to the poker table, like you said. Some days you're gonna win big. Some days you're gonna lose. That's the goal, is to win more than lose, as you said.
Yeah, and the currency markets is no different than the futures market or the stock market or the bond market. All markets have their own peccadillos. They have their own little eccentricities because the people in them and the rules for trading specific markets change slightly. But overall, it's all comprised of people. People all make the same decisions. They tend to act the same way. They're what we would call predictably irrational. And if you understand that, you can develop trading strategies around that over time will produce you a very nice outcome. But that's the clearest advice I give to people is, hey, make sure it's something that you really want to do. Spend some time doing some research. We offer, one of the things I wanted to do when I started doing this is because it was so hard to find really good education that you didn't have to pay a fortune for. And so one of the things I have tried to do since we started Trade Empowered was put together really great training and not charge anybody for it. So we've got a lot of stuff at Trade Empowered. I've done a lot of videos on YouTube that are 1 hour, 2 hour trainings that don't cost you anything. And it gives you a really firm foundation about what to expect, what the difficulties really are, what the commitment level is going to be. And my goal there is to really weed out all the people who are tire kickers. I want those people who recognize how serious it is. So I don't spend a lot of time talking to people about get rich quick or look at all the money that you can make, because those are sales tactics that I'm not particularly interested in. What I want people to understand is this is a very hard business. It's going to take you a very long time to do and to become profitable at. But if you really want to do it, good money can be made doing this, really good money. And I'm going to show you how to do it. And that's the principle that I started with. That's the principle that all of the other team members that we've hired at Trade Empowered, because it's not just me anymore. We've got 3 or 4 or 5 traders now that work with us. And that's the mantra that they all carry too. It's very much a corporate culture, is that our goal is to build independent, consistently profitable traders.
Let's talk about the currency market. Now, granted, all the currencies are fiat currency, so eventually they'll go to zero. But are there any currencies right now that you're bearish or bullish? Like right now, I'm bearish short term on the British pound due to the Brexit, and the euro also due to the banking crisis that's going on over there. So I know they're going to start printing a lot of euros to keep those Eurobank up and running, even though it probably won't work. So I just want to get your thoughts on the currency market.
Well, my opinion, I mean, if you can look at bullish or bearish on a particular currency pair depends entirely upon the pairs that you're trading. So you might look at it and say, well, you might look at the daily chart, for example, and I'm just pulling it up while we're talking here so that we can kind of run through it on the Euro USD, and I can look at the Euro USD and I can see that, the dollar's been that was dollar Canada. I can see that the Euro USD has been, really sideways after the dollar's been very strong. And so I tend to look at this on a very short-term perspective because, like you said, it's people who are looking at the currency markets right now. It's very hard to make long-term predictions because of all the intervention that governments and central banks are doing. And so as I take a look at markets, I look for specific patterns that I know repeat. And so it's not that I look at the euro dollar and I say, well, because of all this fundamental data that I'm getting, I'm bearish against the euro. I look at it and say, okay, I know there's a pattern here, and I know this pattern, every time I see it, has a 70% probability of doing X, either going up or going down. And so I simply look for the pattern. And I say, I know the pattern, I know the probability of the pattern being right, and I know if I trade the pattern every single time I see it, that I can expect to be right 70% of the time. And so that's the way I look at the market. And so if you want to talk in terms of what currencies I think are really, I guess, stand the greatest chance for implosion, it's going to depend entirely on who decides to print the most money the fastest. Because right now, Europe's into negative interest rates. The EU is. The dollar isn't there yet, and they may end up raising interest rates one more time. We'll see. But if they do, then of course the dollar would strengthen against that. So it depends entirely at this point upon who decides to print the money the fastest. And I'm not particularly excited about any of the major currencies I see in terms of long-term viability. I think all of them are going to be inflating significantly.
Now, do you pay attention to political events when you look at the currencies? Like, for example, a couple of years ago, the Japanese yen, if you can look at the U.S. dollar against the Japanese yen, it went straight up for a while. Is that something that you look at as an example when you make trades like that?
I pay attention to news events only to the extent that I either do or don't want to be trading around them. So I typically, my only goal when I trade is to know when a news event that might affect the market is going to hit, so that I can be prepared for it. And all that simply means is I'm in front of my computer so that in case my stops don't get executed or in case something goes wrong, I can close positions quickly. I don't base any of my decisions based on news events because I don't have any idea what the news event is going to be, and I don't have any idea how the market's going to react to it. So I trade only what I know and what I understand, and that's the probability of patterns that I see in the market. And above and beyond that, I don't pay any attention to the news.
So let's talk about the economy. Now, in your podcast, you've been talking a lot about the banking crisis in the Eurozone, in the U.S., and recently in China as well. So what do you think is going to be the end result from all of this?
I think the end result is you're gonna see a very large. Well, one of two things is going to happen first. There's possibly three outcomes. Maybe we can. It's so difficult because every time. The central banks and bankers and politicians are really good at changing the rules in order to prolong an inevitable decline. And so I'm not sure what tactics they're going to use, because anytime you change the rules, it changes potential outcomes completely. But right now, as it stands, either you are going to have a series of near banking collapses in which the central banks come in and do what they did in 2008, and they just simply pay them off again. That, in turn, depending on how they do it, will likely create a significant amount of inflation. Or it's going to become so great and so catastrophic and so global in terms of its scope that they're gonna go to locking down bank accounts, doing bail-ins, which is something I talked about today on the show, where they simply take money out of your account in order to keep the bank alive, and limiting withdrawals, that type of stuff, in order to stave off massive financial collapse. I think right now, from what I'm seeing, because you've got everything from, we talked about Italy today on the show, we've got the European Union, you've got Ireland, the UK I've not read a lot about, but I know it's got to be in the same boat. The United States, Japan, China, as well as the many of the Scandinavian countries that are now into negative interest rates, all of them, every one of those countries has massive banking problems. And nobody's talking about it. Nobody's looking at it. And I can tell you it's not going to end well. It doesn't end well at all.
Does that scare you? Are you scared about what's going to happen from all of this? Because I'm very worried, because this might be a lot worse than what we saw in 2008.
I think you're right. I think it likely will be much worse than we saw in 2008, whenever it happens. And like I said, one of the things about this is very hard to get timing right. So it might be next week, but it might be 2 years from now. We just don't know. But it does worry me. I take precautions to make sure that we have at least enough to survive on, and that we're prepared for a major banking panic. And it scares me about as much as some terrorist group attacking our electric grid and finding out that the whole central part of the United States is without power for 3 weeks. You want to talk about a panic? You don't need a financial panic to cause people to start shooting each other in the street. Just have them go without power for about a week. And so there's a lot of different things that could be very dangerous for our economy. And I think right now we're at one of the most volatile times that we've been at in our history. Certainly the most volatile time that we've been at since I've been alive.
I don't think we ever had a time like this where all the central banks all around the world are printing tons amount of money just to keep the economy propped up.
Yep.
The asset market, real estate, and the stock market.
You're absolutely right. We have never seen it. I was talking with my grandfather about a year or two ago, and he's been a very successful trader and investor. I hope to be half the investor that he is one day. And I was asking him about it. I said, have you ever seen an environment like this? Because he's 85 years old, something like that now. And he said, I've never seen anything like it. He said, this is something that I've never even read about. He said the difficulty in investing right now and commodities markets, everything. He said it's becoming almost impossible to find yield. And he's right. And so I think you've hit it on the nose. I think we are in a period of history now that all signs point to a very negative outcome. And I say that with every hope that we find a way out of it, but I don't see one. And I don't have any faith that those who are running things are going to make the right choices to help us get out of it.
Well, one of the problems that we are having right now, the Federal Reserve yesterday decided not to raise interest rate, which is no surprise if you look at the big picture. I mean, we have the election around the corner. We have massive amount of debt in this country, so anytime you raise the interest rate, the government has to pay more higher interest payments. So is the Federal Reserve handcuffed in terms of raising the rate? Because I think what this economy needs is deflation. So in order to have that, we've got to raise the rate. And I'm not talking about 25 basis points. I'm talking about, 10%, like what we did with Paul Volcker back in the 70s.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I think I don't know what the economy needs, but I think that the free market can tell us. So you say things like, well, I think that we need a significant rate increase. Well, I think that most definitely rates are too low, but I don't know what the right number is. And that's the thing about the free market, is that if you just let rates naturally find their own balance, you would no doubt have some dark days ahead of you, but you would come out of that much quicker, allowing the free market to work. But our central banks haven't done that. And I think there was a lot of scuttlebutt, and half of the central bankers were coming out and saying, yeah, I think we need a rate hike. I think we need a rate hike. And I'd have been shocked if they'd have raised rates. But the way they'd been talking, I said, well, I think there's probably a 50-50 shot at this point just because they're talking it up. And after they decided not to raise rates, I got to thinking about it, and I was talking with Darren, who produces my show, and I said, I'm wondering how much of this is just testing. So the central bank is trying to decide, well, because the central bankers, this is what people need to understand. Central bankers have no idea what they're doing. They have no clue. They've never been in this situation. I think they are sitting around at their meetings scared to death about making any move at all. They don't know what they don't want to cut into negative interest rates, but they don't want to raise interest rates. They're scared spitless about making a decision. And so rather than do that, what if they went out and said, well, let's make all this noise about how we're going to raise interest rates, and then let's see what the market does with that? Because that's exactly what they did. They all came out when they were out at Jackson Hole, all talking about rate hikes and the need for that. And then they were in their minutes, they were talking about the need for a rate hike. And then come September, what happens? Nothing. No rate hike. But they got to see how the market would react when they thought the central bank was serious about rate hikes. And what did we see? We saw big drops in equity markets, because equity markets are largely being propped up by central bank buying. And the idea that they're going to cut back on that central bank on that buying means, hey, that is the clearest cut signal to sell. And I think they're recognizing, hey, we really are in a predicament because we can't raise interest rates without the wheels falling off this wagon.
Yeah, we did an interview with Pippa Malmgren a couple of days ago, and she has a lot of connection with people that work at the Federal Reserve, and she sit down and have lunch with them, and they all admit that their model is broken, and they have no idea what they're doing and what to do next, and they're scared about the future.
Yeah, I have no doubt. People, I love because you listen to the talking heads on the political talk shows. They say, well, I think the Fed has a plan. I think they really do. I think they're looking at stuff. I can promise you, the Fed has no clue what they're doing. If they had any clue, they would be making far different decisions than they're making right now. Because we know what creates a healthy economy. A free market creates the healthiest economy. There is no better system devised by man than a market where buyers and sellers come together and determine for themselves what prices should be. Anytime you inject a government or a governing body into that, you get carnage. And the central bank is nothing more than a middleman who decides what they want interest rates to be and manipulates a free market economy to try and achieve those ends. It has failed time and time and time again, and what we need to do really is just end the Federal Reserve. We need to end that entire system and go back to a time when interest rates are set by individual banks and that rates are determined by the supply and demand in the market.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Free market is what we need in our economy to fix this problem. Even though in the short term it'll be ugly, but in the long term we'll all be better off.
It's going to be ugly no matter what. And what I try and tell people is it's going to be ugly no matter what. It's just the longer you delay, the worse it will be.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So I can't let you go without talking about the election for a few minutes. Now, you're not a big fan of Gary Johnson. I'm not either. But you talked about how the Libertarian Party had a golden opportunity here in the 2016 election to get more exposure and make their case for why libertarianism is better than the Democrat and Republican, and they blew it. Now, let's say if we had a better candidate, such as younger Ron Paul, or something like that, would that make a difference? Like, would that maybe get them into the debate or higher polling results? Because I just want to get your thoughts on what you meant on the golden opportunity. Do you actually think the Libertarian Party have a shot at winning this election if we had a better candidate?
No, not at all. I plan a long game, right? So when I say we had a golden opportunity, what I meant was there has never been more eyeballs and more ears tuned in to what an alternative message is than they are this year. And so early on in the campaigns, what I was seeking was a message carrier. I didn't really care whether we won an election or whether we got twice the vote that we got last year. I think we're going to do much better as libertarians this year just because you have two really hated candidates on both the Republican and the Democrat side. What I wanted people who were looking at third-party options and discovering libertarianism for the first time. And I wanted someone who could carry that message. Because the interesting thing about the 21st century is people go looking. It's no longer they come home and they turn on CBS News and they watch a half hour of news and then they read the newspaper. If they're interested in a third-party choice, they go on the Internet and they start searching. And libertarianism started coming up as an idea long before Gary Johnson was ever the nominee. And so during that process, that vetting process, what I was hoping for was a voice that could really deliver that message and could share libertarianism in a way that people hadn't ever heard it. Because I think that most of us, if I sat down and talked with most people, they would find that they were more libertarian than they are progressive or right-wing. I just truly believe that, because everybody tends to want the same things. And although they may not agree with everything, they agree more with the libertarian principle than the other two. And what we got was a guy who is a terrible messenger. He's terrible about messaging. He doesn't understand really even a lot of the basic libertarian principles, much less be able to explain them to others. He is perhaps maybe Darryl Perry may have been the worst representative just because he was such a hardcore anarchist libertarian. But in terms of, say, for example, in Austin Peterson, which he was also running for president, or Gary Johnson, which is who we got, I think we definitely got the short end of the stick with Gary Johnson.
Yeah, and my friend of mine met Gary Johnson, and he asked him if he ever read Economic in One Lesson, and he said no.
No, he hasn't read that. He didn't. I mean, I know your audience may not know who Murray Rothbard is, but Murray Rothbard is like he is the modern, kind of the modern day saint of the Libertarian Party. Everybody knows who Murray Rothbard is. And unfortunately, Gary Johnson, when asked about Murray Rothbard, didn't even know who he is. So I don't have any idea where he really stands on a lot of issues, but I can tell you in terms of his messaging for libertarians and the libertarian idea, he's terrible at it. And you know, I can say that because I think I'm better. And if he was better than I was, I'd say, well, he's not very good, but I couldn't do any better. I think I could do 10 times as good as he does. That's why I've started the show, is because I want to create a place where I can actually share a message that I think is compelling to everybody.
I agree. So are you going to run in 2020?
No, I'm not going to run. In fact, I think that by the time 2020 rolls around, we will have a following and a voice that would far exceed anything that you could get by running for political office. I think I am much more valuable on the outside, creating havoc and holding to account those people who are in elected office than I ever would be in elected office myself.
I agree. Yeah, podcast is the best way to get your voice out and, you know, spread out the increase the exposure for liberty and freedom and libertarianism as well. And we do the same thing.
It's changing the world, man. It really is.
Yeah, definitely it is. Are you surprised at how Trump has accomplished and how far he has gotten? I am.
Yeah, I am. I am a little bit. I will admit that when he first came on the scene, I was like everybody else. I thought, oh, this is cute, but nobody is going to bite off on this. He'll end up saying something so repugnant that everyone will just say, nah, I can't deal with that. It turns out he can say pretty much whatever he wants to, and nobody really cares. That's where we're at in terms of political discourse in America today. And but now that he's won the nomination, I'm not at all surprised that he's starting to take the lead over Hillary Clinton. I think he will end up winning. I think he has. I mean, he's filling stadiums when Hillary Clinton's having trouble getting a couple of hundred people to show up. I think come Election Day, Trump is going to have the turnout, and Hillary is going to be left wanting.
Really, that's interesting. I still think Hillary's going to win just because she has the establishment behind her, and they'll find a way for her to win.
Well, that's the argument on the other side, and you may be right. So we'll find out in November.
You know, as you mentioned, you have your podcast, the Jason Stapleton Show. I just found out about your show a year ago from Tom Woods. So how long have you been doing it, and how do you like doing the podcast?
Next month will be 2 years, and it's been awesome. At first, it was difficult. Like when you're doing anything new, you don't really know what you're doing, and and we're trying to put on this show and learn about audio equipment and everything else, and we're doing video too. So it was a struggle in the beginning, and I don't know where you're at with your podcast, but I remember sitting around talking with Darren, my producer, when we had 200 people listening to the show every day, and I said, I don't know how much longer I can do a show that nobody listens to. And because 200 people is not. I mean, some people would say, "Well, it's a room of 200 people. That's a lot of people." But in the internet sphere, 200 people is nothing. And so you look at that and you say, "Well, man, I don't know how much longer I can do this with nobody's really interested." But we managed to grow it from 200 to 2,000 to 20,000, and yesterday we broke 30,000 people, 30,000 listeners, and so it's been incredible. The audience has responded, and I love coming in every day and talking with people and giving a voice to people who otherwise don't have anyone else who's talking about the things that are important to them. I have tried to take modern-day talk radio and modern-day daily news consumption, something that you would get in drive-by, and I've tried to make it something that libertarians want to listen to and that also goes in detail on subject matter. So we don't do drive-by news. I might spend an hour talking about 2, maybe 3 subjects in the hopes that the audience walks away with a better understanding of what's happening in the world around them and how libertarian principles apply to that. And I got to tell you, the response has just been overwhelming. I'm humbled and I'm excited, and I can't wait for 2017. I think we've set a goal of 100,000 listeners in 2017, and I don't think we're going to have any trouble getting there.
That daily or per month?
Daily.
Wow. Oh, congratulations. So I always go to your podcast every time anything happens in market or any political event or social event, because I know I can get a good in-depth details on what's really going on compared to the mainstream media. So if people want to find out more about your podcast and your company, Trade and Power, where can they go?
Yeah, the podcast is just jasonstapleton.com. And if you're a podcaster, you can go and find us the Jason Stapleton program. So I make it real easy. I'm not very creative when it comes to naming stuff. So it's jasonstapleton.com or iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you like to go to get your podcasts. And then if you want to find out more about trading, if that's kind of your niche and that interests you, that idea, you can go to tradeempowered.com. And just check out all the free stuff. We got lots of free training there, and I just tell people, look, before you spend any money, invest some time learning a little bit, and then once you decide, you want to make a go of it, then let us know, and we'll point you in the right direction.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your time, and definitely I hope you come back on again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.